The rain drummed steadily against the windows of the small, cozy coffee shop nestled on the corner of Maple Street. It was one of those rare afternoons when the world outside seemed muted, almost dreamlike, as if inviting people to pause and find solace indoors. Emily sat at her usual spot by the window, sipping lukewarm coffee while staring absent-mindedly at the droplets racing each other down the glass pane. She wasn't particularly fond of crowds or conversations, preferring the quiet comfort of books and music instead. Yet here she was, alone in a public place trying to escape the monotony of her apartment. Her gaze shifted slightly to the artwork hanging on the opposite wall, a quirky painting of mismatched clocks melting into one, another. The piece had always intrigued her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Maybe it was the way the colors clashed yet somehow worked together, much like the chaotic beauty of life itself. Lost in thought, Emily didn't notice the man who slid into the seat beside her until he spoke. "Interesting choice," he said casually, nodding toward the painting. His voice was warm and inviting, carrying just the right mix of curiosity and confidence. Startled, Emily turned to face him. He looked younger than she initially assumed, mid-20s perhaps, with tousled dark hair and an easy smile that softened his sharp features. There was something about him that felt different from the usual patrons of the cafe, a kind of restless energy, like he belonged somewhere far beyond this sleepy little town. "Oh," Emily replied softly, caught off guard. I guess so. It's certainly unique." She hesitated, unsure whether to continue the conversation. Strangers rarely approached her, and when they did, she often found herself retreating into silence. But there was something disarming about this man, his relaxed demeanor, the genuine interest in his eyes that made her want to stay engaged. "It reminds me of time," he mused, leaning back in his chair. "How unpredictable it can be. You think you've got everything figured out, but then suddenly things change. Like these clocks. They're all falling apart, aren't they?" Emily blinked, surprised by his observation. She hadn't expected such depth from a casual comment. "Yeah," she agreed slowly, finding her voice. "It's like nothing stays the same forever. Even when we try to hold on to moments, they slip away." He chuckled lightly, clearly amused by her response. "Exactly. By the way, I'm Daniel. Just passing through town for a couple of days." "I'm Emily," she said, offering a small smile. "Nice to meet you." For the next 20 minutes they talked effortlessly, as if they'd known each other for years. Daniel shared stories of his travels, how he'd hitchhiked across Europe, slept under the stars in Morocco, and gotten lost in the winding streets of Tokyo. Each tale was vivid and full of life, painting pictures of places Emily had only ever seen in photographs. Despite her shyness, she found herself asking questions, eager to learn more about his adventures. In return, Daniel asked about her life, genuinely interested in her answers. When she admitted she preferred staying in rather than going out, he didn't judge her. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "There's something comforting about familiarity," he said. "Not everyone needs to chase thrills to live fully." Their connection grew stronger with every passing minute, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Emily felt completely at ease. She laughed freely, shared bits of herself without hesitation, and even cracked a joke or two. It was as though Daniel had unlocked a side of her she didn't know existed, a version of herself that was confident, witty, and unafraid. But as quickly as their meeting began, it came to an end. Glancing at his watch, Daniel sighed. "I should probably get going," he said reluctantly. "My train leaves early tomorrow morning." Emily felt a pang of disappointment, but masked it with a polite smile. "Well, safe travels," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Would she ever see him again? Probably not. Men like Daniel, free-spirited, adventurous, untethered, didn't stick around in places like this. As he stood up to leave, Daniel pulled out his phone. "Hey, do you mind if I take your number?" he asked, "just in case our paths cross again someday." Surprised but flattered, Emily nodded and recited her digits. They exchanged a final smile before he walked out the door, disappearing into the rainy afternoon. For a long moment, Emily stared at the empty seat beside her, replaying their conversation in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something profound had just happened, something she might never fully understand. Little did she know, this chance encounter would set the stage for a story she could have never imagined. Weeks turned into months, and life in Emily's small town resumed its predictable rhythm. The rain-soaked afternoon at the coffee shop became a distant memory, tucked away like an old photograph in the back of her mind. Yet no matter how hard, she tried to focus on her daily routines. Work deadlines, grocery runs, quiet evenings with a book. Thoughts of Daniel kept creeping in. It wasn't just his face or his voice. It was the way he had made her feel during their brief encounter. For those fleeting moments, she hadn't been the shy, reserved Emily who second-guessed every word she said. She had been someone else, entirely, bold, curious, and alive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily found herself scrolling through old pictures on her phone. Most were mundane snapshots, meals she'd cooked, flowers blooming in her garden, the occasional selfie taken on a rare outing with friends. But then, buried among them, was a photo she hadn't realized she'd taken. A candid shot of Daniel sitting across from her at the cafe. In the picture, he was mid-laugh, his head tilted slightly back, eyes crinkled with joy. She must have snapped it instinctively, without thinking, because she couldn't recall doing it. Staring at the image now, her heart ached with a mixture of longing and regret. Why hadn't she said more? Why hadn't she told him how much their conversation meant to her? At the time, she had convinced herself that it didn't matter, that he was just another traveler passing through her life, leaving behind nothing but footprints. But deep down, she knew better. That day had mattered more than she cared to admit. He had seen her, not the version of herself she presented to the world, but the real her. And somehow in return, she had seen him too. The thought gnawed at her relentlessly. What if she never got the chance to tell him? What if years from now she looked back on this moment and wondered what might have been? Her fingers hovered over her phone screen as doubt warred with determination. Sending a message felt reckless, almost foolish. After all, why would someone like Daniel remember someone like her? They came from different worlds. He, a wanderer chasing horizons. She, rooted firmly in the familiarity of her quiet existence. Still, something inside her refused to let go. Finally, after hours of staring at the blinking cursor on her messaging app, Emily typed out a note. It started simple enough. A casual hey followed by an apology for reaching out unexpectedly. But as the words flowed onto the screen, they grew more honest, more vulnerable. She told him about the impact their meeting had left on her, how it had lingered in her thoughts long after he'd walked out of the cafe. She admitted that she often replayed their conversation in her mind, cherishing the laughter and connection they'd shared. And then, trembling with nerves, she confessed. What she had never dared to say aloud, she liked him, more than she should have given the circumstances. When she hit send, a wave of relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. Almost immediately, panic set in. What had she done? This wasn't like her. She wasn't impulsive or daring. She was careful, calculated, always weighing the risks before taking action. Yet here she was, baring her soul to a man she barely knew, hoping against hope that he would respond. Days passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Emily checked her phone obsessively, jumping at every notification only to find it was spam or a group chat update. With each unanswered hour, her confidence waned. Maybe she had misread their connection entirely. Maybe he hadn't felt the same spark she had. Or worse, maybe he thought she was being clingy or desperate. The idea of rejection stung, but the uncertainty was unbearable. By the 5th day, Emily had resigned herself to the likelihood that she wouldn't hear back. She tried to distract herself by throwing herself into work, cleaning her apartment top to bottom and even attempting to bake a cake, which ended disastrously. But late one night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. Her heart leapt into her throat as she reached for it, half expecting disappointment once again. Instead, she saw a name flash across the screen. Daniel. Her hands trembled as she opened the message. His response was thoughtful, heartfelt, and far warmer than she could have imagined. He began by apologizing for the delay, explaining that he had been traveling without reliable internet access. Then, in words that made her breath catch, he confessed that their meeting had stayed with him too. He described her kindness and quiet strength as qualities he rarely encountered but deeply admired. He admitted that he hadn't reached out sooner because he feared ruining what little connection they shared, a fear that mirrored her own hesitation perfectly. But it was the final line of his message that left Emily speechless. "I'm closer to your town than you might think. Maybe we can talk more soon." For a moment, she simply stared at the screen, unable to process what she had read. Was this real? Could it be possible that Daniel felt the same way she did? The idea seemed too good to be true. Yet there it was, written in black and white. A mix of emotions swirled within her: hope, disbelief, and a flicker of excitement she hadn't felt in years. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Emily allowed herself to dream. Not wildly or recklessly, but cautiously, like testing the waters of a stream. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wasn't the end of their story. Perhaps it was only the beginning. The days following Daniel's message felt like a whirlwind of anticipation for Emily. Every morning she woke up with his words replaying in her mind, each sentence carrying a weight that was both thrilling and terrifying. He had mentioned being closer to her town than she expected, but what did that mean exactly? Was he living nearby now, or was he simply passing through again? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but it also kept her hopeful. Hopeful that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't done weaving their paths together. After a few exchanges of texts, they agreed to meet at the same cafe where their story had begun. It seemed fitting, almost poetic, to return to the place where everything started. Yet as the day approached, Emily's nerves grew stronger with every passing hour. She found herself second-guessing everything. What should she wear? Should she bring up their last conversation right away, or let things unfold naturally? Would he still seem as kind and genuine as he had before? Or would this reunion reveal cracks in the connection they'd built? On the morning of their meeting, Emily stood in front of her mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. She opted for something simple yet polished, a soft sweater paired with jeans, and spent far too long debating whether to leave her hair down or tie it back. In the end, she settled on leaving it loose, figuring it made her look more approachable. As she walked to the cafe, her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the sound of her own footsteps. The autumn air carried a crispness that matched her mood, equal parts excitement and apprehension. When she arrived, she spotted him immediately. Daniel was seated at the same table they had shared months ago, his attention focused on the quirky clock painting. For a moment, Emily paused just inside the doorway, taking him in. He looked much the same as she remembered. His dark hair slightly tousled, his posture relaxed, but there was something different too. Maybe it was the way he smiled when he saw her approaching, a mix of familiarity and nervous energy that mirrored her own. "Hey," he said warmly, standing up to greet her. "You made it." "Of course," Emily replied, forcing a smile despite the butterflies fluttering in her stomach. She slid into the seat across from him, suddenly hyper-aware of how quiet the cafe seemed compared to their first meeting. Back then, the hum of conversation and clinking cups had provided a comforting backdrop. Now the silence between them felt heavier, charged with unspoken questions. They started with small talk, how work was going, what new books or movies they'd enjoyed lately. But it didn't take long for the conversation to deepen. Daniel opened up about his travels since they last met, sharing stories of breathtaking landscapes and unexpected challenges. He spoke of the loneliness that sometimes crept in during his journeys, a feeling Emily understood all too well, even if her solitude stemmed from a very different source. "I guess I realized something while I was away," Daniel admitted after a pause, His tone had shifted, becoming softer, more introspective. All those places I visited, all the people I met, they were amazing, don't get me wrong. But none of it stuck, you know? None of it felt real. Not like talking to you did that day. Emily blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. Real? She echoed, unsure how to respond. He nodded, his gaze steady. Yeah, you didn't try to impress me or pretend to be someone you're not. You were just you. And that's rare. Really rare. Her cheeks flushed at his words, though she couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or pride coloring her face. Before she could formulate a reply, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. I haven't stopped thinking about our conversation, he continued, about how easy it was to talk to you, about how much I wanted to stay longer but didn't because I thought. He trailed off, shaking his head. I don't know. I guess I convinced myself it wouldn't matter. That someone like me wouldn't fit into your life. The vulnerability in his voice struck a chord deep within Emily. Until now, she had assumed she was the only one grappling with doubts and fears. Hearing Daniel admit his own insecurities made her feel less alone, less afraid of being rejected. Still, questions lingered in her mind. Questions she couldn't ignore any longer. What about now? She asked hesitantly. Do you still think that we're too different? Daniel hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his words were measured but sincere. I won't lie. It scares me a little. We come from such different worlds and I don't want to mess this up. But I also can't shake the feeling that walking away again would be a mistake. A big one. His confession left Emily speechless. Part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind and embrace whatever came next, no matter how uncertain. Another part, the cautious, analytical side she knew so well, urged her to tread carefully. After all, relationships weren't built on fleeting moments or grand gestures. They required effort, compromise, and trust. Could she really see herself navigating those complexities with someone like Daniel? As if sensing her internal struggle, Daniel reached across the table, his hand resting lightly over hers. The gesture was gentle, non-threatening, yet it sent a jolt of warmth through her entire body. We don't have to figure everything out today, he said softly. But I'd like to try, if you're willing. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She didn't have all the answers, and maybe she never would. But sitting there with Daniel, surrounded by the familiar sights and smells of the cafe, she realized something important. Life wasn't about having perfect plans or knowing exactly where you were headed. Sometimes it was about taking a chance, even when the outcome was uncertain. With a slow, steady breath, Emily nodded. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Let's try. And just like that, the door to possibility swung open once more. Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a more frequent presence in Emily's life. At first, his visits were sporadic, once or twice a week, always unannounced but never unwelcome. He would show up at her door with a bag of pastries from the AO bakery downtown or call her just to ask if she wanted company for dinner. Each time, Emily found herself smiling despite her initial reservations. There was something comforting about the way he made an effort to integrate himself into her world, not by overwhelming her but by easing into it step by step. Their conversations flowed effortlessly, as though no time had passed since their first meeting. They talked about everything, his travels, her love for gardening, their favorite childhood memories, and even the mundane details of daily life. One evening, as they strolled through the local farmer's market, Daniel stopped to admire a stall filled with jars of homemade jams and pickles. You should get one, he encouraged, pointing to a jar of strawberry preserves. It reminds me of you. Emily raised an eyebrow, amused. Strawberry jam reminds you of me? He grinned, his eyes twinkling mischievously. Sure. Sweet, simple, and full of surprises when you least expect them. Her cheeks flushed at the compliment, but she couldn't help laughing. Well, I guess I'll have to take that as a win. Moments like these became a regular part of their budding relationship. Whether they were exploring the town together, watching old movies at her apartment or simply sitting in companionable silence on her porch swing, Daniel had a knack for making ordinary moments feel extraordinary. For someone who had spent most of her life avoiding attention, Emily discovered that being seen by Daniel didn't feel intrusive. It felt safe. Safe enough to let her guard down, to share pieces of herself she had long kept hidden. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As much as Emily enjoyed Daniel's company, doubts still lingered in the corners of her mind. She worried about the differences between them, their lifestyles, their priorities, their visions for the future. While Daniel seemed content to live in the moment, Emily was a planner, someone who thrived on structure and certainty. How could two people so fundamentally different build something lasting together? One chilly Saturday afternoon, as they walked along the riverbank hand in hand, Emily decided to voice her concerns. The leaves had turned shades of amber and gold, crunching beneath their feet as they moved. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke, and the sky above was a pale gray, hinting at rain later in the evening. "Can I ask you something?" she began hesitantly, glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. "Of course," Daniel replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Anything." She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Do you ever think about where this is going? Us, I mean." Daniel slowed his pace, turning to face her fully. His expression softened and he nodded thoughtfully. "I do," he admitted. "More than you probably realize. But I also know that rushing into things isn't the answer. Relationships are messy, and figuring out how to make them work takes time." "I know," Emily said quickly, feeling a pang of guilt for bringing it up. "It's just, we're so different. You're used to freedom and adventure, and I'm—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Rooted, settled. What happens when those worlds collide?" For a moment, Daniel was silent, his gaze fixed on the swirling water of the river. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but tinged with emotion. "I won't lie. It scares me too. I don't want to lose the person I am, and I don't want you to change either. But maybe being together doesn't mean we have to give up who we are. Maybe it means finding a way to blend our worlds instead of choosing one over the other." His words struck a chord deep within Emily. She had always assumed that relationships required compromise, one person bending to fit the mold of the other. But what if Daniel was right? What if love wasn't about sacrificing your identity, but about creating something new together? "I like that idea," she said softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Blending our worlds." Daniel returned her smile, his eyes lighting up with relief. "Me too. And hey, if blending doesn't work, we can always argue over whose turn it is to pick the movie." Emily laughed, the tension melting away as easily as frost under sunlight. For the rest of their walk, they joked about hypothetical arguments. Who would win in a debate about toppings for pizza, which holiday traditions they'd insist on keeping. But underneath the light-hearted banter lay a deeper understanding. They were both willing to try, to navigate the challenges ahead together. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel continued to weave himself into the fabric of Emily's life in small but meaningful ways. He attended the annual fall festival with her, marveling at the pumpkin carvings and indulging in caramel apples. He joined her for weekend grocery trips, helping her carry bags while teasing her about her obsession with organizing produce by color. Slowly but surely, he became a fixture in her routine, not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who belonged. Yet even as their bond grew stronger, Emily couldn't shake the nagging question in the back of her mind. Was this real? Or was it just a beautiful chapter destined to end? She loved spending time with Daniel, loved the way he made her laugh and the way he listened to her without judgment. But love alone wasn't always enough to sustain a relationship. Could they truly overcome the differences that threatened to pull them apart? One crisp autumn morning, as they walked side by side under a canopy of golden leaves, Daniel stopped, suddenly. Turning to face her, he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch warm and deliberate. "Emily," he said, his voice low and serious, "there's something I need to say." Her heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading and hoping for all at once. Whatever he was about to say would define the path they were on, for better or worse. I know we're still figuring things out, he continued, his eyes locked onto hers. And I know we're not perfect, but I also know that I don't want to keep wondering what could have been. So here's my question. Are you willing to take a chance on us? On building something real, even if it's messy and unpredictable? Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she looked at him. In that moment, she realized that perfection wasn't the goal. Love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. It was about finding someone who made the journey worthwhile. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. I'm willing. And just like that, the uncertainty gave way to hope, a fragile, flickering flame that promised to grow brighter with time. The weeks that followed Daniel's heartfelt question passed in a blur of shared moments and quiet discoveries. Emily found herself embracing life in ways she hadn't thought possible before. It wasn't just the grand gestures or sweeping declarations, it was the little things, the everyday choices that made their bond stronger. Daniel continued to visit regularly, but now there was an unspoken understanding between them. This wasn't temporary. They were building something real, something enduring. One chilly November morning, as frost clung to the grass outside her window, Emily woke up to find Daniel already in her kitchen, humming softly as he flipped pancakes on the stove. The sight caught her off guard, not because it was unusual for him to be there, but because it felt so natural. So right. She leaned against the doorway, watching him move with ease, his sleeves rolled up and flour dusting the front of his shirt. You're making breakfast? She asked, feigning surprise. He glanced over his shoulder, grinning. Well, someone has to feed you. You've been working nonstop lately. She laughed, stepping closer to peek at the pan. Since when did you become such a domestic expert? Since I realized how much you appreciate good food, he teased, flipping a pancake onto a plate. Besides, I figure if we're going to make this work, I should probably learn how to cook more than toast. It was a simple exchange, light-hearted and playful, but it carried a deeper meaning. Daniel wasn't just visiting anymore. He was integrating himself into her life in ways that mattered. He remembered the small details, the way she liked her coffee strong but sweet, her preference for early mornings over late nights, even her habit of folding laundry in precise stacks. And Emily, in turn, found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else. She shared her fears, her dreams, and the insecurities she'd spent years hiding behind walls of silence. But blending their worlds wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when their differences threatened to create distance rather than closeness. One evening, after a long day at work, Emily came home to find Daniel sprawled on her couch, scrolling through travel blogs. His face lit up as he showed her photos of exotic destinations, mountains shrouded in mist, turquoise waters lapping at white sand beaches, bustling markets filled with vibrant colors. Look at this place, he said excitedly, pointing to a picture of a remote island. Wouldn't it be amazing to go there someday? Emily forced a smile, though her stomach tightened with unease. It looks beautiful, she admitted, sitting down beside him. But do you ever miss it? Traveling, I mean. Daniel hesitated, sensing the weight behind her question. Sometimes, he confessed, but not in the way you think. I don't miss being alone or constantly chasing the next adventure. What I miss is the freedom to explore new places. But I also want to share those experiences with someone who matters. Her heart softened at his words, but the doubt lingered. And what happens when I can't keep up? When my roots feel too deep to pull out? He reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. Then we'll find a balance. Maybe we won't travel as much as I used to, but that doesn't mean we can't still explore. We'll make our own adventures right here. Together. His reassurance eased her worries, but it wasn't until they started doing exactly that, creating their own adventures, that Emily truly began to believe him. On weekends, they ventured beyond the confines of their small town, hiking nearby trails, visiting neighboring cities, and discovering hidden gems tucked away in forgotten corners of the countryside. Each trip brought them closer, proving that Adventure didn't have to mean leaving everything behind. Sometimes it simply meant seeing the familiar through fresh eyes. As winter settled in, blanketing the world in snow, Emily noticed subtle changes in Daniel too. He no longer spoke wistfully about far-off lands or restless journeys. Instead, he talked about plans, real, tangible plans that included her. He helped her decorate her apartment for the holidays, stringing lights along the windows and hanging ornaments on the tree. He joined her family for Christmas dinner, charming her parents with stories of his travels and winning over her younger brother with his knowledge of football stats. Through it all, Emily realized something profound. Love wasn't about finding someone exactly like you. It was about finding someone who complemented you, who challenged you to grow while accepting you for who you were. Daniel brought excitement and spontaneity into her life, while she offered stability and depth into his. Together they created a harmony neither could achieve alone. One crisp January afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the park, Daniel stopped suddenly beneath a towering oak tree. Its branches stretched skyward, bare but resilient against the gray winter sky. Turning to face her, he pulled a small box from his coat pocket. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I know we've taken a lot of steps together already, some big, some small, but I want to take one more. With you." Her breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a delicate silver ring nestled inside. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared at it, unable to speak. This wasn't just a proposal. It was a promise, a commitment to navigate the uncertainties of life side by side. "I'm not asking for perfection," Daniel continued, his gaze unwavering. "I'm asking for us, for whatever messy, imperfect, beautiful future we can build together. Will you say yes?" For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The wind rustled the dry leaves around them, and somewhere in the distance, children laughed as they played in the snow. But all Emily could focus on was the man standing before her, the man who had once been a stranger in a cafe, whose presence had changed her life in ways she never imagined. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes, I will." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, Emily felt a surge of gratitude, not just for the moment itself, but for the journey that had led them here. Love hadn't come easily to her. It had required courage, patience, and trust. But as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she knew it had been worth every step. In the months and years that followed, their lives became a tapestry of shared memories. Quiet evenings curled up on the couch, spontaneous road trips to unknown destinations, and countless conversations that stretched late into the night. Their worlds weren't perfectly blended, nor were they without challenges. But they faced each obstacle together, drawing strength from the bond they had worked so hard to build. And as they stood beneath that same oak tree one spring morning, surrounded by blooming flowers and the promise of renewal, Emily realized something else. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with the simplest encounters. A rainy afternoon in a cafe, a chance meeting between two strangers, a confession sent with trembling fingers, and returned with an open heart. Together, they had turned a fleeting moment into a lifetime.